Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get to detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. Ukraine's amnesty law fails to pacify protesters. President goes on sick leave. World Panorama gets you an expert perspective. We take a look at Barack Obama's State of the Union address, the highlights of what's being termed as a go-it-alone approach. Syrian peace talks in Geneva progress inch by inch. Government and opposition talk on political transition for the first time. And Michael Schumacher's doctors start trying to wake him up. The Formula One champion from a medically induced coma. He's been in since a skiing accident. Our top story. The anti-government protests in Ukrainian capital Kyiv are finally getting results, it seems. The Prime Minister has resigned and the President, Viktor Yanukovych, who triggered the demonstrations by abruptly refusing to sign a trade treaty with the European Union, has 60 days to form a new government. Yet the protesters in Independence Square say they won't budge until Yanukovych calls new elections, which polls suggest he would lose by a wide margin. Ukrainian president went on sick leave on Thursday after a bruising session of parliament, leaving a political vacuum in a country threatened with bankruptcy and destabilized by anti-government protests. The 63-year-old president appears increasingly isolated now in a crisis born of a tug-of-war between the West and Ukraine's former Soviet overlord, Russia. Even if protesters get anything they demand, the country will likely remain deeply divided over relations with its neighbors, and there are no straightforward solutions, it seems, for its economic problems. In fact, a poll by Kyiv International Institute of Sociology found out that 39% of Ukrainians want to join the EU, while 37% prefer closer ties with Russia. To understand what's happening in Ukraine, the situation better, and is there an end to the crisis that we're seeing, I welcome on my show Professor Sheetal Sharma from the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to the show, Professor Sharma. Now, before I start talking to you and take your expert perspective, here's a look at this report that I've compiled for our viewers. Protesters in Ukraine have rejected the terms of a new amnesty law aimed at ending the country's recent unrest.
В багатьох містах вони вже не знають страху, вони знають, що вони борються за країну, за своє майбутнє. І ми переможемо, ми все впевнені в цьому, тому що без боротьби перемоги ніколи не буде.
The amnesty is the latest of a number of concessions from President Viktor Yanukovych to try to end the unrest, including the resignation of Prime Minister Mykola Azarov and his cabinet, and the repeal of new anti-protest laws.
Дорогие соотечественники, сегодня я принял для себя очень трудное и вместе с тем ответственное решение подать в отставку с поста премьер-министра. Я принял это решение потому, что я хотел обеспечить возможность всем нашим политическим силам достичь согласия, достичь компромисса и завершить тот кризис, который начался.
Protesters are demanding Yanukovych's resignation, early elections, and the firing of authorities responsible for violent police dispersals of demonstrators. Meanwhile, Ukraine's embattled President Yanukovych has taken sick leave as the country's political crisis continues without signs of a resolution. Earlier, European Union's foreign policy chief met Yanukovych and civil society representatives.
Dialogue that has happened from time to time needs to become a real dialogue. It seems to me that from looking perhaps from the outside and from the information we have, that there is a real opportunity that must be grabbed right now to get a serious dialogue going between different parties, people, in order to try and address the concerns that people genuinely have about the future of the country and to bring people together.
In a worrying statement, Ukraine's first post-independent president said Ukraine is on the brink of a civil war.
Ситуація, будемо говорити відверто, драматична. Весь світ визнає, і Україна визнає, що держава знаходиться на межі громадянської війни. В країні двовладдя, в країні йде фактично повстання.
6 people have been killed in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities in protests that erupted more than 2 months ago. Though the unrest began because of Yanukovych's U-turn on policy towards Europe, it has since turned into a mass demonstration punctuated by violent clashes between radical protesters and police against perceived misrule and corruption under Yanukovych's leadership. All right, Professor Sharma, now, we all understand that there are at least some divisions within Ukraine, but I want to know from you, what's that one focal point that triggered this crisis, so to speak?
Sana, if we talk about the political crisis, it has a long history. And in fact, if we try understanding this history, it goes back to the years of the Iron Curtain, the divide between East and the West. However, the problem is that now that European Union wants to dictate a normative order,
right,
which Ukraine is unable to do because of the lack of the political will of the governing
but where does the support of the people really lie now? What are the people asking for? Because we've seen that there seems to be no end to the crisis. Yanukovych has gone on sick leave. Just when we thought that a deal might come through, he would talk, with the protesters, and things might settle down. But that doesn't seem likely. So what's the Ukrainian president thinking right now?
See, if we talk about the general population, it's not just in Ukraine, it's in many countries of the European Union as well as all over the world. You can cite Delhi also as an example here. People want a free environment, a corruption-free government, which does not promote nepotism or, favoring certain an enrichment of the elites of the
classes,
or political elite only. So what people are right now thinking about, or what the civil society is actually advocating for is a kind of environment in which people have freedom. As you see, that what Yanukovych is doing is trying to drift towards authoritarianism,
Right.
And that again is bringing the harsh memories back of the communist times when there were no freedom
And being pressurized by Russia as well to take stern action.
Yes. And it is being pressurized by Russia, and people do not want their freedom, what they have got, after a long struggle to once again go into, the father of, and Russia wants Ukraine to be within its ambit because Russia has another aspiration of having a Eurasian Union.
Their own interest, right?
Now, caught between the European Union and the Eurasian Union, the proposed, the envisaged union, Ukraine is not unable to take any decision which side to go. And at the same time, they are trying to play very smart also in terms of, not taking any standards, also taking a particular stand so that they can squeeze out maximum concessions from both the sides.
Okay.
So this is something which is a stand taken by the government. However, people are uncertain. People are kept in dark, or they are just guessing that what has been put at stake by the government, particularly we are talking about Yanukovych here, in trading a deal with Russia.
Okay.
So the opposition as well as the people on streets and civil society, they want to ask what has been given to, what has been surrendered to Russia. And in no case they want to surrender their sovereignty now.
Absolutely, and they're not letting the protests die down anytime soon.
Absolutely.
But now there are also talks about emergency being imposed. Now that's something that the government has, can resort to. It's going to be a last-ditch effort, but then it's also going to complicate the already complicated situation.
It will certainly, because when the protest started in the month of November, it was all peaceful protest. However, the way the police handled some of the situations, even these people had given their instruments back to the government.
Right.
But there was a kind of, pressure, which was coercive in nature from, the state authorities.
Some 6 people died as well.
Yes. And what happened as a consequence of that, people got agitated. And certainly when silence becomes violence, in mass movements and social movements, you cannot guarantee, it's a very thin line.
Right.
And it has already happened. And now if they coerce more, if they try to put more pressure on people, it is going to certainly bounce back.
It's going to backfire. Do you think the Prime Minister's resignation that really didn't prove to be of any use at that particular point in time? Or
It's
because we're
more,
not seeing any results.
The
after that.
resignation is more, a kind of cosmetic step being taken. It is, although indicating that he takes moral responsibility of whatever is happening or will happen or has happened so far. But the reason is that the amnesty law that they agreed, in a quick parliamentary session, that has not been signed, and he goes on protest. And now what kind of orders, who is going to order, and what kind of action the police is going to take in order to curb all these social movements, that is very difficult. And
Right.
people are sitting in open in such harsh winter, minus 10
Absolutely.
to...
It's really tough. We have seen visuals,
Yes.
obviously, but the protesters are saying we're not going to vacate these government buildings no matter what laws you pass, but we want the president to resign. But that does not seem like
happen.
the case.
Yes.
How do things look from here, like let's say 15, 20 days moving ahead?
We cannot predict what actually will happen, say, in 15 to 20 days, because first of all, president has gone on a leave, sick leave. You never know how long he is going to remain sick. The second thing is, one of the key players, either the European Union or the Russians this side, they have to play a decisive role now. Because there is a fragmentation of opinion between the masses and the elite in Ukraine. Masses are drifting towards the European Union, and the elite are under the influence of the Russians.
Right.
Now, one of them has to come forward and be very decisive in terms of offering something to Ukraine.
So it's important for the government to pacify the protesters first, and Yanukovych has to come out and face the people rather than, going on leave, because people understand that this is just not done, and the cosmetic measures that the government has taken, people do understand what's going on. Professor Sheetal Sharma, it was a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me on World Panorama. With that, we're taking a very short break. Lots more in store up ahead. A closer look at Obama's State of the Union address. I'll be right back. You're watching World Panorama. Facing a still sharply divided Congress, US President Barack Obama pledged to charge forward on his own to push a second-term agenda focused on rising worries about economic inequality and opportunity in his State of the Union address. The strategy is aimed at shifting emphasis to the power of the executive branch after many of his proposals remain unfinished or untouched in the halls of Congress in 2013. A look at the highlights.
US President Barack Obama has called for a year of action to make progress in the recovering US economy while combating inequality and expanding opportunity for Americans.
Today, after 4 years of economic growth, corporate profits and stock prices have rarely been higher, and those at the top have never done better. But average wages have barely budged. Inequality has deepened. Upward mobility has stalled. The cold hard fact is that even in the midst of recovery, too many Americans are working more than ever just to get by, let alone to get ahead. And too many still aren't working at all. So our job is to reverse these trends.
Obama used his annual State of the Union address to chart a new path forward, relying on his own executive authority. But the defiant, go-it-alone approach was more assertive than any of the individual policies he advanced.
What I offer tonight is a set of concrete, practical proposals to speed up growth, strengthen the middle class, and build new ladders of opportunity into the middle class. Some require congressional action, and I'm eager to work with all of you. But America does not stand still, and neither will I.
Republicans in the US Congress decried Barack Obama's address.
The president's policies are making people's lives harder. Republicans have plans to close the gap. Plans that will focus on jobs first, without more spending, government bailouts, and red tape.
Urging the Congress to give American diplomacy a chance, Obama spoke on foreign policy matters for 10 minutes in an hour-long address. He talked about Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and Africa.
But let me be clear. If this Congress sends me a new sanctions bill now that threatens to derail these talks, I will veto it. For the sake of our national security, we must give diplomacy a chance to succeed.
This year, Obama faces the difficult challenge of repairing damage to his approval ratings from his own missteps and broad frustration with elected officials after a lengthy government shutdown in 2013. And he struck a forceful tone as he prepares to enter a crucial and narrow window of opportunity to acclaim what remains of his agenda.
Over to Geneva 2 talks now, where they were aimed at ending the war, and they did take a first tentative step forward on Wednesday as both sides from Syria agreed to use the same document as the basis of discussions, although they disagreed about how the negotiations would proceed. Opposition representatives said that for the first time they had discussed the establishment of a transitional government with officials from President Bashar al-Assad's regime. Here's more.
Brahimi's optimism, it seems, is paying off bit by bit. After days of deadlock and dispute, Syrian peace talks appear to inch forward. Opposition representatives said that for the first time, they had discussed the establishment of a transitional government with officials from President Bashar al-Assad's regime.
We had a positive step forward because for the first time now we are talking about the transitional governing body, the body whose responsibility is to end dictatorship and to move toward democracy and end the fighting and the misery in Syria.
Both sides said they agreed to use the Geneva Communique, a document agreed at a previous international conference in Geneva in June 2012, and which sets out the stages needed for an end to the fighting and a political transition.
Positive today, actually, because they spoke about terrorism, they spoke about Geneva 1, and the only difference between us and them, which is a major difference, is that we want to discuss Geneva 1 item by item, starting from the first item. They don't want to discuss Geneva 1 item by item, they want to jump to the item that speaks about transitional government, and they're only interested in being in government.
The government describes those fighting to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad as terrorists. The opposition says transitional arrangements must include the removal of Assad, which the government rejects.
طبعا النظام يريد أن يؤخر الحديث حول تشكيل هيئة حكم انتقالي والتي هي أساسية لإنهاء المعاناة والتعامل بطريقة منهجية مع كل المشكلات، يريد أن يؤخرها إلى نهاية النقاش.
Despite the apparent small step in the peace talks, chances for a breakthrough appear almost nil as both sides continue to blame each other for an impasse. The two sides have apparently not made any progress so far on humanitarian issues related to the conflict, like prisoner exchanges or getting aid supplies to the besieged residents of the old city sections of Homs.
Much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of all the international news of the week. A Bangladeshi court sentenced 14 people to death, including an Islamist party leader, Indian militant, a former security agency chief and a former deputy government minister for involvement in the country's biggest ever arms smuggling case. A leader of United Liberation Front of Assam or ULFA separatist group from northeast India, Paresh Barua, was among those who were awarded death penalty. The trial of Egypt's ousted President Mohamed Morsi and 130 others was postponed to late February. Morsi stood trial along with more than 130 other Muslim Brotherhood members of the Palestinian militant group Hamas and Lebanese Shiite militant group Hezbollah for storming the Wadi al-Natrun prison and kidnapping and killing police officers during 2011 Tahrir Square uprising. Cuba's ex-leader Fidel Castro met with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in the Cuban capital Havana. The two met for about 55 minutes and exchanged ideas on issues including conflicts in Syria, Central African Republic, South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. India's Foreign Minister Salman Khurshid met his Sri Lankan counterpart G.L. Peiris on Wednesday to hold discussions on several key issues and to strengthen bilateral relations between the two countries. Peiris arrived in Delhi on a 3-day official visit. Khurshid and Peiris discussed fishermen and human rights issues ahead of UNHRC's session in Geneva. The Executive Council of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons (OPCW) held a meet behind closed doors on Thursday in The Hague to discuss the lack of progress on shipping out Syria's toxic arsenal for destruction. The deliveries in 2 shipments this month to the northern Syrian port of Latakia totaled 4.1% of the roughly 1,300 tons of toxic agents reported by Damascus to the OPCW. The internationally backed operation, overseen by a joint OPCW-UN mission, is now 6 to 8 weeks behind schedule. A rare ice storm turned Atlanta into a slippery mess on January 29th, stranding thousands for hours on frozen roadways and raising questions about how city leaders prepared for and handled the cold snap that slammed the country's south. The storm, which has killed at least 7 people, swept over a region of about 60 million largely unaccustomed to ice and snow, stretching from Texas through Georgia and into the Carolinas. Formula One legend Michael Schumacher to be woken up from coma, and football fever is catching up in the run-up to the World Cup. A look at news from sports this week.
Doctors treating 7-time Formula One world champion Michael Schumacher for injuries suffered during a skiing accident will begin lowering his sedation levels to start waking him up from an artificial coma. The retired racing driver, the most successful Formula One champion of all time, has been in a stable but critical condition for more than 4 weeks in a hospital in the eastern French city of Grenoble. Football, the beautiful game, celebrates the world of soccer at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where a curator has assembled a show about the mythic, the heroic, the poetic and the violent manifestations of the game. Exhibited at the show is Andy Warhol's 1978 portrait of Pele and 50 other works of art celebrating the World Cup, which will be held this year in Brazil. The Super Bowl comes to Times Square. 5 days before the National Football League Super Bowl will be played in East Rutherford, New Jersey, fans felt the excitement of the big game in Times Square. Super Bowl Boulevard opened to the public, offering football fans a feel for the big game. Spanning 30 blocks along Broadway in Midtown Manhattan, the boulevard will be host to many of New York's Super Bowl fan events. Alex Zanardi, former Formula One driver and 2-time US Kart Series champion, returned to motorsport recently when he tested the BMW Z4 GT3 car he will drive in the Blancpain GT Sprint Series. Zanardi had a horrific racing crash in Germany in 2001 in which he lost both his legs. He learned to walk on prosthetic legs and set about working on how he could return to racing. Brazil's government estimated it will spend $2.3 billion on projects related exclusively to Rio de Janeiro's 2016 Olympic Games. The initial estimate from Brazil's Public Olympic Authority includes spending by federal, state and municipal governments for projects carried out through both public-private partnerships and by the government alone.
Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Folk singer and activist Pete Seeger has died at the age of 94, his record label said Tuesday, after a long career collecting and championing the folk songs of the United States as well as writing his own classic hits. Seeger was a greatly admired figure among the musicians and fans of the folk revival of the late 50s. His career spanned 8 decades and he first became famous as a member of the Weavers Quartet, formed in 1948. Their first hit, Goodnight Irene, held the #1 slot on the US charts for 13 weeks. The two surviving Beatles, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, came together at the Grammy Awards for a rare joint performance coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the British group's breakthrough on American television. With McCartney at the piano and Starr at his drums, the two played a new song, Queenie Eye, a catchy tune that harkened back to the Beatles' trademark hits. John Lennon's widow Yoko Ono and son Sean Lennon were in the crowd dancing along on Sunday. a film depicting the scandalous real-life affair between one of Britain's most celebrated authors, Charles Dickens, and an 18-year-old actress, Nellie Tiernan, premiered in London. The Invisible Woman is the second movie directed by Ralph Fiennes after Coriolanus, and the Academy Award winner does double duty by playing the lead role of Dickens. The movie is set at the time when Dickens' relationship with his wife was coming to an end. Quentin Tarantino will be suing online publisher Gawker Media and the website enonfiles.com for more than $1 million for posting a copy of his unproduced screenplay. The lawsuit accuses enonfiles.com of illegally posting Tarantino's script for The Hateful Eight and accuses Gawker Media of copyright infringement for posting a link to the script. Tarantino accused agents for one of the three actors he had met with for parts, Bruce Dern, Tim Roth and Michael Madsen, for the leak.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. As I sign off, take a look at how Chinese usher in the Lunar New Year. This is the 4,712th New Year for them, also known as the Year of the Horse. Enjoy.